Howdy, what's going on, everyone? This is Lucas here again. I'm really happy that I've been getting some more comments on some of these tutorials, so I got kind of inspired to make a bunch of videos lately. Today we're going to be talking about dialing in axe effects for 7 string, high gain rhythm sounds. But this could work for, new metal, gent, heavy metal, just whatever you might need 7 string high gain sounds for. You could use 6 string too. So I thought this would be really fun. I'm going to be using axe effects. I'm going to try to be really minimalist and get the most out of just like a few blocks without going crazy on effects. And so just a couple quick things that I should note before we start playing that you should know about. So for one issue with recording guitar is monitoring. Um, so what I mean by that is like I'm using Ableton, but any recording software that you have is going to have some amount of latency when you're recording. So you can minimize that by lowering your sample rate, which I'm going to do right now. Um, so right now I'm literally just monitoring through Ableton, which means that all the sound that I'm playing from the guitar is going through Ableton. But if you have like an Apollo interface or an interface that has direct monitoring um, feature, you could actually monitor right here through console. I know like some Focusrite interface have that. Um, I'm just not going to do that right now, just for the simplicity for me to record this video a little more easily and have the audio. But so yeah, if you want to minimize your latency, that's usually a great idea to use like direct monitoring. Anything that's running through your DAW is going to have a little more latency. It's going to feel weird. It might not be noticeable, but I just wanted to note that. Another thing that I also wanted to note, since we are discussing specifically rhythm guitar tones, what I usually do actually is I have my tracks already panned hard left and right, because usually like your rhythm guitar, there's some exceptions, obviously. It kind of depends on the song and what you're doing, but for me, most of the time my rhythm guitars are going to be hard panned, so it's actually kind of weird to hear them in the center, because they're not going to be in the center. So I don't monitor with them in the center. I don't record with them in the center. So like for this guitar track, I just panned it hard left. It would sound like this. And it gives me a better idea of like what it's actually going to sound like in the song. So I'll do that in advance to be able to get it dialed in correctly. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to actually leave it in the center, because I realize that might be like a little weird and confusing to have stuff panned for like a tutorial video. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. I really suggest experimenting with that, because, yeah, like I said, most of the rhythm guitar tracks that you're going to hear in like a metal song are going to be panned somewhere in the mix. So if you're dialing in your tones in the center, it's thrown me off in the past. So I wanted to just put that out there as a suggestion. Another important thing with axe effects, this is just some like housekeeping stuff, but you need to dial in. If you go to setup, you must dial in your input level. Every guitar, depending on the output, is going to hit the front of the axe effects harder or softer. Depending on the output of your pickups, how hard you're playing, etc. So you want to look at the meter on your axe effects and make sure you're not clipping. You can crank this up just for the effect of having like a louder input signal, so your amp's going to be more distorted. My guitar is pretty high output apparently, so I just have this as at 0. But that's kind of the one thing that you need to, when you're working on high gain stuff, is you need to get your gain staging set up so that you can, have a good sound. So that's kind of like the first thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is for like high gain rhythm. Hopefully you can see there's going to be a lot of noise from this part of the guitar here, like the ringing of the strings. So I put a scrunchie. I hate the way that it looks, but if you're recording, you don't want that noise. And if you have a guitar that has this guitar doesn't have that issue, but some other guitars have like Tune-o-matic style Gibson bridge, and those make a ton of noise. So you might need to put like something on there to dampen that if you're recording chugs. Just wanted to mention that in case you're not aware. Noise can definitely be like a huge issue when recording heavy guitar. All right, so diving right into axe effects. The first thing that I like to do is get my cabinet situation going. It's literally the most important part of your tone. Um, if you've ever switched cabs before, like while playing live or playing through a head, it makes a world of difference. I love the Own Hammer cabinets. So that's what I'm using right now. I recommend checking out like their heavy hitters for metal. But basically, you can definitely there's great ones included with Axe Effects. Although what I prefer doing to kind of keep things simple is the way that the Own Hammer works is they have like certain ones that are like a mix of different mics and stuff, similar to what you'd be using in a recording session like at a big studio or something. So I use those. They'll have mixes of mics, mixes of speakers, and different brands and stuff like that. So I find this to be easier because I can just have one IR loaded in and just use one of these mixer channels and kind of be done with it. It can be a huge time suck if you're using some of the included Axe Effects IRs. You might have like 3 or 4 different mics and be blending them and all that. I don't like spending a lot of time doing that, so I just went online to Own Hammer, bought the ones that looked like they were basically for metal, like big oversized cabs with V30s. Load that one up. So I'm using this Marshall EVH V30 that I've used for a while, and I really like it. So I like to call it a day. So with the cab block, this block does a lot of stuff, and I like to keep it really really minimal because it can get pretty crazy. I don't love the sound of a lot of different IRs blended together. I find that it can be a little weird. I kind of just pick one and roll with it. I don't use these preamps. You can get some interesting sounds here, but I just prefer to leave it with nothing. I don't use this room air, and so I try to keep this simple just because I've gone through a whole phase of like tweaking this like crazy and just found that my tones were sounding really weird. So now I just use a single IR from Own Hammer and just call it a day. So that's the most important block to have straightened out. Once you get your cab kind of situated, obviously you're going to need to choose an amp first to be able to play, but I usually get the cab tweaked a bit first and then worry about the amp. So I'm going to use the FAS Modern. Don't sleep on the Fractal Audio Systems amps. I think they're actually by a pretty impressive margin. Well, at least this modern one I think is one of the best amps that they have. Um, Everything's kind of set to noon. So let me just explain a couple things that I'm looking for. So first, with the drive, you don't want there to be too much gain. I like sort of figure out how much gain I need by like trying harmonics and stuff. I want like a pinch harmonic, but I don't want there to be like so much gain that it's like muddy. So I try to dial this back like as much as I can. Also, you do have to mess with the master volume too. It just depends on the amp that you're using, but some amps will prefer to have the master like cranked up. Others will want to be lower. Usually for higher gain amps, I think you can have the master lower because it just gets like more flubby the higher that you crank it. So I have this pretty low. And then the first thing that I should mention actually is for the preamp, I like to turn on this boost. You can change boost types if you want it to be like an 808 or whatever, but I just have a neutral boost, like 3 or 4 dB is kind of nice. And then right here, this is super, super important. If you're using 7-string or low tunings, you're going to want to do a major low cut. So I might even set this up to like 300. The tighter you want it, you may crank this up or not. So like as an example, if I turn this totally off, it would sound like this. So much more low end there. So find your sweet spot. That could change depending on what kind of music you're playing too. So yeah, this is a really critical knob for doing metal, and I like having an input boost because then that eliminates the need for, well, to some extent eliminates your need for like a drive pedal block. So you can really get a lot of mileage out of this amp block just with the preamp area here. So boost, low cut, those are critical, and so I actually just turn those on first and then start to dial in from here. So everything else is kind of taste. I should mention depth is really interesting. Depth usually adds like bass, but kind of in the master section. So this is a nice one to mess with if you want to add back a little bit of that like boominess since we cut it. I like my sounds really bright, so I turn on the bright switch, and everything else you can do to taste. Some metal will have like a mid cut, which will sound like this. But yeah, you can just kind of mess with that and figure out kind of what you're doing. with the specific song or the sounds that you're trying to get. But if you have a pretty nice cab on, you shouldn't need to put a lot of work into here. It's just, a little bit here and there to taste. Yes, that's kind of mainly how I'd approach the amp block, is really just starting with the preamp section, add my boost, add my low cut, dial these into taste. Maybe after that, mess around with a couple different cabs. I usually keep a few different ones loaded in and I save them. I actually don't have too many saved here, but yeah, you can just save like a configuration and do different channels too. So like I could copy current channel to all channels and just start messing with them and use different combinations. Next thing I should mention, I actually learned this tip from Leon Todd. He mentioned putting the noise gate in between the amp and the cab, which has been super helpful for me. You may not really want a gate. Like some of those like super modern like Genty songs have like a really like that kind of sound. You may not want it. I like to have it for noise management. Because my setup's like a little noisy here. But yes, so that's that. But yeah, so I have the gate kind of going regardless. If you're doing leads, you may want to turn it back. So I like to use a gate block instead of the input gate here because there are more controls on this one. And I have it set to like really fast attack and release. And really intense attenuation, so you may want to just play around with this to get it to sort of where it needs to be for the noise level that you have. Unfortunately, there's going to be some amount of noise when playing with high gain, especially if you're using single coils, and also depending on your setup and the power at your house, it's really annoying to troubleshoot noise. Like even like USB devices and stuff like that generate a lot of noise. As I found out with this Axe-Fx setup with like the interface and all that. So troubleshooting noise really sucks, but the gate will help you a lot with that. So I have my amp first, my gate, my cabinet, which we talked about, and then the last thing that I like to do is I put a parametric EQ, so you can find that right here. This is great because I can get a little bit of the EQ work in just right on this Axe-Fx interface before I have to deal with it in the mixer, like in my DAW, but you may or may not want to do that, but just to give you an idea. So what I'm doing, this may change depending the song and the key that you're in, but I like to find like little resonances, like nasally sounds that I don't like the sound of. So the way that I do that is you can just boost some frequencies here at like a narrow, at like a very narrow Q. And find ones that sound unpleasant to you. So for me, like, and this will change depending on the guitar, depending on the song, depending on the key. But I find that there's a couple like resonances around sort of between 250 and like 400, around 300 ish that I find unpleasant. And I don't do a huge amount of dip. I'll just dip like 1 or 2 dB at most, just a small amount with sort of like a fairly sharp Q, but you can make it flatter if you want to do it that way. But yeah, so I just kind of do this to taste to get rid of like low mid buildup. And then what I'll also do, since I like a really bright, very like high fidelity guitar tone, is I'll actually boost like a top shelf or just like something around like 8K or like maybe even around 4K. Just to taste really not a whole lot, but just to get it like sounding extra crispy and stuff. So I just have like less EQ work to do in Ableton, but you could also just do this in Ableton and not commit to it. And then I guess the last thing that I should mention, I learned this technique, I think from Leon Todd, but I'm not sure, but you can make your or maybe from Austin Buddy, you can put a send block here at the end of this and turn your return all the way up on this side, so it's send one, return one, and get a whole second layer. I'm not really even using it, but I think that's a neat technique to have if you want to add a bunch of delay and chorus and stuff. You have like plenty of real estate. Anyway, so that's my patch. I really hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you are able to get some cool metal sounds using like some of these techniques. It's really pretty minimal. And I think it ends up sounding really good. So let me know how it works for you. Take it easy.